So for many years, my Monday mornings looked very similar, and my Mondays always start with numbers. So I would be pulling data from QuickBooks, I'd be pulling data from our CRM, I would be pulling data from things like Looker Studio, my team's reports, everything. Once I had this information, I would sit down and I would start to build our management report. This is the document where I analyze everything that's going on in the business, be able to share it with the rest of the team, and prepare for our team meeting stand-up. So we really understood what's the number one and number two things for us to work on as a team. This would sometimes take me 2, maybe 3 hours on that Monday morning to get all of the data together and actually analyze it in the most effective way. But last Monday, I sat down at my desk, I took all of the files and I dumped them into a folder on my desktop. Then I asked Claude to go in and actually build my management report. I got up, went out, made a cup of coffee. About, 10 minutes later, I came back and the report was done. I made a few adjustments, reviewed all the things, added a little bit of analysis, and I hit send. The email off to the team was done, and this was a matter of minutes, not hours. This didn't happen because Claude as a tool has gotten vastly smarter. It's because I learned to stop using it like a chatbot. What I found working with many of our business clients as I continue to graduate through this idea of starting to incorporate AI, many of us are still using AI as a chatbot, as a thinking partner rather than a doing partner. So for context, to see if you're in this camp, what this looks like is you open up Claude or ChatGPT or any of the other tools out there, you describe something that you want to achieve, you go back and forth a few times, you maybe get an answer, and you move on and go do the task. The next time that you want to get that done, best case scenario, you're sitting back down in that same chat to ask it additional questions and ideally get a similar output. More often than not, you may actually be starting over a brand new chat, having to give it all the context once again to start over from the ground up. So what I've figured out in the past year or so is that AI becomes vastly more effective and more powerful in your business when you stop using it as a thinking partner and start using it as a doing partner, the one that's on your team that helps you accomplish things. The difference here isn't the model. The difference here isn't a better prompt. It's ensuring that the tool has the context. It understands you. It understands the business. It's been set up properly to have the information necessary to start giving recommendations and building things alongside you instead of having to start from scratch every time. When this starts to become true, you stop having to focus on the context and start thinking about the outcome. Build the report, draft the email, update the website. Claude already has the context and is able to jumpstart that progress. This is what systems over heroes looks like in the context of AI. The work used to require me, now it requires a system. So let me show you exactly how I've built that, and I'm going to give you everything that I've learned. If you want some help with this, if you want to take this to the next level, and you're ready for it, feel free to reach out to the team, and we'll see how we can help. The playbook, the step-by-step process, you're going to get that today here in this video. So let me start with the management report, because this is the cleanest example of how this all works. So about a month ago, I was really sick of Mondays. They took up so much time. I had so much of the context, but it lived right here inside my head. I knew the numbers. I knew the context that the team needed to see. I knew the types of decisions we were going to need to be able to make. But I had to culminate it all together in a report from scratch every single week. So I tried something different. So on week 1 of this process, I took all the documents, took all the information, all the sources of where I get my data, QuickBooks, Go High Level, our CRM, Looker Studio, website traffic, anywhere that we had marketing, sales, client data, anything that has happened over the past week. And I took all of that and I dumped it in a folder on my desktop. So nothing fancy, no fancy tools, just create a folder on the desktop and I dumped all these files in. From there, I took a copy of last week's report and the email that I sent over to the team and I put it in there as well. Once all the data was aggregated, I opened up Claude Cowork. And in Claude Cowork, I gave it access to this specific folder. and I gave it some context. I used my whisper flow tool so I didn't have to type anything, simply hit the button on my computer, and I spoke it into existence. I told it what was in the folder. I said, I need to create a management report. I need it to look a certain way. These are the types of things that are in the management report. These are the types of decisions that we need to be able to make. Here's the data that you have access to. Here's an example of what we did last week in terms of the report and the email to the team. I verbally brain dumped everything I possibly could in order to get the outcome that we're looking to achieve. I tried to share what was in my head in terms of what a incomplete or bad report looks like. I tried to share what good looks like, what done looks like, what type of output that we're looking to achieve. And then I had it do probably the most important thing when it comes to building things like this. And look, if you're sitting here trying to figure out how this relates in your business, my guess is if you've ever worked with a contractor, you've ever worked with employees, you've gone through something similar. You've had a project, you had something that you wanted to achieve, and you had to go through this similar process. You had to describe what it was that you wanted to achieve, what that outcome was, what context was needed, and allowed them to go forth and do the work. And you expected, in most cases, to have them ask you questions when they get stuck. This was a very similar process. When I hit that enter button the first time, it took a little while to read through all the documents, but it did exactly what I had asked. It stopped, it paused, and it asked me clarifying questions. It asked me things like, how do these numbers relate? What does this report specifically mean? How do you want to see this particular number showing up in the report? What are the things that matter? And I was able to give it the context because they were questions that I hadn't thought to give it context on before. In all, that back and forth process the first time around probably took right around 20-25 minutes. Roughly 10 minutes later, after it had the context, I had version 1 of the output of the actual management report. And you know what's crazy? It looked a heck of a lot better than the reports that I had built previously. So let's fast forward to week 2. Week 2, I came in now with some context. I had everything into the folder, took all the new data, dumped it in, shared a copy of the new report that we had built from the previous week. In the same chat thread, it had the context of what we were building, so we had a lot less back and forth, but there was one key change. The team, my additional executives, shared with me their thoughts of the report, and one thing came out that was really important. The report was too long. There was too much in it. It had all of the information. It was fantastic. It had great analysis. And in some cases, for a deeper board report, that might have been really useful. For a weekly report, it was a bit too much. And in this case, I think it was roughly around 16 pages. So the context that I gave it, the new update, the new direction that I gave Claude Cowork to achieve this task in week 2 was to cut the report down, to identify what are the most important aspects of this report for us to report on. How do we shift this and make it into a 3-page report versus a 15 or 16-page report? Did the analysis once again, came back with a few clarifying questions, and went to work. This time around, our back and forth was roughly about 10 minutes. Now, once again, came back about 5-10 minutes later as we allowed Claude to do the work, and we had a brand new report. Beautiful. Shorter report, more concise, more actionable, easier for us to make decisions as a collective team. Drafted the email, sent it off. Now, all in, we're talking 20 minutes total. So let's move on to week 3. Week 3, probably 5 minutes of iteration back and forth. The only change that we decided as a team we needed in the management report was a bit of color coding for the headline KPIs. We wanted to be able to very quickly visually see what was on plan, what was off plan. So anything that's red, those are the things we wanted to be able to dig into. And realistically, those are the only ones we need the supporting detail on, because if everything else is on plan, we're good to go. About 5-10 minutes later, new report, output, ready to go, sent off, and we're done. Now we're talking 15 minutes total, which now brings us to last week. There's one thing that I did in the interim between Monday of the previous week and Monday last week is I went into this chat and I asked Claude to do me one very specific important thing. Now that we had gotten to the output desired, the report that looks exactly the way that we need it to look, I asked Claude to build a skill that will produce that output every time. Claude went to work and it built the skill. And the skill is essentially just a set of instructions, a couple files and folders of what to do and how to do it. And then it saves it in the configuration, in the customization side of the Claude settings. By doing this, this was the unlock. This was the time saver. Because this last Monday, took all of our data, dumped it into the folder, opened up Claude and said, use the management skill and build our report. 10 minutes later, it was done. So now that you understand the context, let me show you what this actually looks like. This is the project. And this here is the folder that it has access to. These are some of the files that I drop in every Monday. Some of them are PDFs, some of them are Excel documents, some of them are pulled directly from QuickBooks, some of them are pulled from other places. Over here, if you go into Settings and then into Customization, you can see the set of skills. And this right here is the skill that Claude uses every time it builds my management report. So back here in the chat thread, you can see how the report was being built in real time. And you can see all of the files that it creates for me directly in the folder that I gave it access to. In 3 to 4 weeks, I went from 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 hours of building a report down to about 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes will probably continue to get shorter as I continue to refine this process. This right here is the difference between having a chatbot and an employee. A chatbot essentially starts from 0 each time. An employee has context and tools to be able to get the work done on your behalf. So let me walk you through the configuration that made all of this possible. Because the report story really only works for you if you have things set up correctly. So I'm going to walk you through the 5 pieces that make this possible. The personal preferences, the projects, the connectors, the skills. If you do nothing else after watching this, just do the first 3 this week. It will take you less than an hour, tops. So piece 1, let's talk personal preferences. So this is the introduction. Before Claude can really do anything for you, anything for your business, it needs to know who you are. It needs to know who your business is. It needs to know the context of who it's interacting with on a day-to-day basis and how you like to be interacted with. So we're going to go into Claude settings. And there's a section for personal preferences. My encouragement is to fill out every field possible, every little toggle that you think is important, all of the details about you and how you want it to be responding. This is the Claude instructions. Share with it what you want to be called. Share with it what kind of work you do. Share with it how you like to respond. Are you someone that prefers someone that's a little bit more direct and right to the point? Do you prefer a little bit of witty banter? What is it that you really care about and how you like to connect and communicate, and set your tool up with those preferences? For me, I told Claude that I want to be a blunt, data-first operator assistant. I want things to be a bit more concise. I want it to challenge my assumptions. I want clear recommendations, not just options of things to go after. Those are some of the preferences that I have right now. And because I have these set up, every conversation I have with Claude, all of this stuff's already baked in. I never have to re-explain who I am. So if you don't know what to write or share with Claude, here's a bit of a trick. I want you to open up a new chat right here in Claude and say, I'm setting up my personal preferences. Ask me the questions that you need in order to set up my complete profile so that you know how I work, who I am, and the best way to work with me. This is where Claude's essentially going to interview you, get to know you, and then based on your responses, build out the custom instructions that matter to you. So now let's dig into piece 2, projects. I use projects for just about everything. I'm not a huge fan of just having uncategorized chats. I like to have everything in the projects themselves. The best way to think about this is a project inside Claude or ChatGPT or any of the other tools that you may be using is essentially just a container. And that container holds additional context, memory, instructions, and files. so you can set up exactly what it is you want it to do. As an example, I have a couple projects pinned here so that you can see. One of them is on health and fitness, and that is a project folder that is specific to being my health and fitness coach. So I've given it instructions on how I want it to work with me in that area of my life. I have given it access to files from past workouts, from blood work, vital signs, as much information that's relevant to that particular area of my life, I have put in as context within this container that is the project. Now, each time I go into a chat in that project, it has all of that context to be able to understand how it's operating with me in that particular area of my life. I have additional projects for the business, for my 2026 goals, for personal branding, for handwritten notes. Each area has a different purpose and serves me in a different way. By giving it the context of how that area of my life works, it's able to serve me and work with me in a much more effective way. So the action item here for you is to pick maybe 3 areas in your life that you would like to set up some instructions for. That if you had a individual kind of person, so to say, that was going to help guide you and work with you in that area, what information would you want it to have? How would you want it to work with you? What's the context and the additional documentation that it may need? That's the other files. And you're going to share all of this within this project folder. So let's get into piece number 3, connectors. So think of this as the team, the other tools that Claude needs access to in order to do the most effective work alongside you. Claude has a large list of connectors built right into the desktop app and into the browser app. So you can see this by going into settings, finding the connectors section, and then looking at the list. Anything that you actually use, I recommend connecting it. So for me, what I have connected right now are things like Gmail, Google Calendar, Google Drive, Slack, Notion, GitHub, Canva, Zoom, Granola, QuickBooks. I have a couple things that are very specific here to the web-based browser that can be connected anywhere, and then there's a few that are specific to the desktop app itself, meaning it can connect to things on my actual computer. So this is things like being able to use the Chrome browser to access my Apple Notes, my Apple Reminders, to take over control of the computer when necessary to be able to do some work on my behalf. All of this happens inside of connectors, and setup is no more difficult than a few clicks and signing in. So this may sound like a lot, but it's really not. It takes a matter of minutes to get many of these set up. And the thing is, you don't have to set everything up. Start with what you use on a daily basis. So if you're in the Google ecosystem and you're using Drive and Calendar and things of that nature, start there. If you're using a bunch of different tools and softwares like I am, start to connect those first. Don't connect things just to connect things. Look for the things that you actually use. And if you gave Claude access to it, it would be able to get more of your work done alongside you and for you. The reason my management report works quite well and runs very smoothly is the more I connect it to things like QuickBooks, as an example, it can pull the data directly. I no longer have to take the time to go grab the data from QuickBooks and then allow it to do the work. By using these connectors, that step is now negated. When you give Claude access to the tools that you actually use, the work starts to progress directly to Claude without you having to copy and paste. Talk about time saving. So let's go to piece number 4, skills. And I talked a little bit about skills earlier in this video, but skills is where everything starts to compound. A skill is more or less a saved set of instructions, a saved workflow, if you will. You build this once, you give it all of the step-by-step instructions, and then Claude can do it every single time. It's like having an SOP that your team follows without having to look it up consistently. So as you can see, I have a skill for the management report. I have a skill for building what I call micromagnets, a term I learned from Taki Moore. And then I've installed a handful of preset skills that were developed by the team over at Anthropic. Not every skill has to be developed directly by you. There's a whole marketplace of skills available for you to grab and connect. This one skill here, where Claude can create its own skills, is probably the one that I'm going to encourage you to go download first, because that makes it 10 times easier for when you have a workflow that you'd like to start building skills with, to have Claude do that for you. So let's talk about piece 5, what I haven't built yet. And I want to be honest about this, because I think the important aspect of how all of this technology is evolving is there's so many different things that can still be done. And even I haven't gotten to every aspect of it, or I'm using it to its full capacity. The number one thing that's on my list that I'm not using the way that I could yet is scheduled tasks. So Claude has scheduled tasks here in Cowork, and Claude can run tasks on a schedule. But right now, those scheduled tasks need the desktop app in your computer to actually be open. Because I'm using my laptop, it isn't always on. So I've had to kind of build around it for now. What this looks like in the future is, as long as it's pulling the data and it has everything into the folders that it needs to, I could set a recurring task to run the skill from the management report and save me the 10 minutes it takes, so that I can walk to my desk and everything's already done at a certain time every Monday. Another area that I still am growing through is continuing to build these skills and these tasks for every repetitive thing within my life and within my business. As I start identifying what these patterns look like, what the consistent workflows look like, I'll start to create more, just like I did for this management report. In full transparency, this means that my setup is not finished. And the reality is, I don't know that it ever will be. And I think that's the point. The technology is growing so fast that there's always going to be so much more that we can do. If you can take one thing off your plate that used to take you an hour and now takes you 5 minutes, what can you do with an extra 55 minutes? This is where we actually start. So I want to share one more story with you. The management report, that's just one example of how all of this fits together. But that doesn't have to be the only thing. A few weeks ago, I was starting to build out a multi-stage marketing and funnel system for our business. Relatively big project that was going to take time to complete. This ended up looking like roughly 30 pieces of work, or 30 individual sub-projects that all needed to get done. Some of those were going to be manual, some of those were going to be delegated to team members, and some of them, ideally, Claude could just do for me. So for this particular one, I did start inside of a chat. And I started to brain dump everything that is in my head and had it help me outline what this was going to look like. Not only did it help me create the outline of those 30 sub-projects, but we started to highlight which of these was going to take my time, which of these were going to take my team's time that I could package together and email over to them and have them start to work on it, and which of them, given the right tools and the right set of instructions, could I just have Claude go do for me using Cowork and some of the browser extensions. So what this looked like in practice was maybe an hour of work on a Friday of going back and forth and choosing which 2 or 3 we were going to tackle for that week. Once identified and outlined and figured out what we were going to do, I set Claude to go do the work. And yes, it is a bit slower. When you watch Claude in a browser or over your computer, writing emails, loading things into your CRM, it takes longer than I could do manually. But the key difference is that I didn't have to do it. And I could take my time to go do something else. In this particular project, it was an afternoon, got done with a few meetings. It's almost about dinner time with the kiddos. And I really need to get these emails written. And not only just written, they need to be drafted, they need to be put into the CRM, they need to be ready to go. And all of this was going to take some time. So because we had the context and the instructions and everything that we needed, I asked Claude Cowork to go do that work for me. And it took it 30 minutes, 40 minutes maybe. But in those 40 minutes, I went out and had dinner with my family. And then when I came back, it was done. This is the leverage that we're moving towards. Writing emails, creating Excel documents, creating tracking links within this marketing system. All of this done by the tool. And one of the most important things when it comes to this is I didn't have to create the context around the business, around me. I didn't have to re-explain who I was. It knew what we were working on. It knew the context from the conversations we had previously. It knew from the folders and the documents and everything that I have shared with it so that when I said we were going to start talking about some marketing stuff, it knew what we were marketing for and the best way for our business to continue to thrive in the marketing space based on the context that it already had. This is the unlock when you have the connectors, the tools, the skills, the instructions, the context already preloaded. So here's what it all comes back to. The reason the Monday report story matters so much is not that it was building a report, but it's about what happens when you stop being the one that has to do the work and start relying on systems to run various aspects of your business. Heroics don't scale, but systems can. AI is not going to fully replace small businesses, but it has the ability to replace the inconsistency. The version of Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or any of these tools that understands and knows your business, the one that has access to your work, that runs your playbooks for you and alongside your team, this is when it transcends beyond being a chatbot and a true system that helps you run your business. If you take just one thing from this video here today, I encourage you to stop, open up Claude or your tool of choice, get the configuration set up properly so you're not wasting any more of your precious time having to re-explain yourself every time you want to get something done using AI. Build these skills slowly. Over time, they will compound. Sitting with a client the other day, and she reminded me that it can feel very overwhelming to go and try and learn all of this stuff in AI. It doesn't happen overnight, and I guarantee you it's actually one of the easiest technologies to learn, because the more you use it, the more you have conversations with it, the more you help it set itself up correctly, the faster it can teach you on how to work with it. Meaning it's going to go at your pace, your speed, your technical ability, and allow you to become so much more efficient as a human being that frees you up to do the things that you actually want to do. If this has been useful, I encourage you to subscribe. I'm continuing to document as much of this process for y'all, not just use of AI, but how do we use this to actually get our time back and start running AI within our businesses so we're ready for the future. So stick with me, and as always, let's go build some amazing businesses together.